Welcome to the ID Den podcast, the show for teachers ready to step outside the classroom and into their next chapter. I'm your host, Charity Bosch, and I know firsthand how overwhelming it can feel to leave teaching behind. Whether you're exploring instructional design, navigating corporate culture, or just figuring out your first steps, this show is your roadmap. Each episode will tackle the real challenges, share practical strategies, and prove that your teaching skills are exactly what the world needs, just in a different setting. Let's turn that classroom expertise into your career advantage. In today's episode, I want to talk about the decision that is likely keeping you up at night, and that is the decision of whether you should leave the classroom or not. This is not a decision to take lightly, and having conflicting emotions is totally normal. And I want to spend this episode going through both sides, weighing the pros and cons of leaving the classroom, as well as provide you with some questions to think through yourself to help you make that decision. The pros of leaving the classroom. We're going to go through some of the common ones that I've heard of and or experienced myself. And the first pro that comes up a lot, and I have experienced myself, is a better work-life balance potential. A lot of people think that being a teacher gives you a lot of balance because you get summers off and you get Thanksgiving off and you get a winter break and you get a spring break and you get all this time off. It's wonderful. But you know, as a teacher, as well as I know, having been a teacher, that breaks aren't always breaks, and you do so much work during the other times that until those breaks come, you don't have a balance. It isn't equal. You aren't leaving your work at work and getting off and coming home. You're taking your work home with you to grade papers, to lesson plan, to create things in Canva. There's a lot that's going on that a lot of people don't see. They just see the breaks and think that teachers have it so good. The next pro that I experienced myself and that I've heard a lot of people talk about, especially if you're earlier in your career, is a higher earning potential. When I left the classroom, I immediately made almost $30,000 more a year than when I was a teacher the second that I left. There is a lot of higher earning potential. And when you combine that with that work-life balance that you're going to experience in most cases, if you're not in a toxic environment at least, then those two things alone are usually enough to make people want to leave. Another thing that a lot of people experience is less emotional and physical exhaustion. It is a lot to be a teacher. And I remember very vividly being able to drink as much water as I wanted throughout the day and not having to worry about, well, I can't drink too much because I still have a couple hours between recess and lunch. I got to go at recess and then I got to go at lunch and I can't really go between then. So I'm going to temper my water drinking. No, I'm hydrated so well now that I don't have to worry about that. And then I remember getting off work and just being so exhausted and coming home to toddler that wanted my attention and love, and I wanted to give it to her, but I was just so tired. And so then my kid got it, and then I made dinner, and by the time my kid went to bed, there was nothing left for my husband. I was so exhausted. We would just sit on the couch and watch TV until bedtime. And I definitely have less of that. We have a lot more energy. I have energy to give my kids. I have energy to give my household. I have energy to give my husband. And so that's another thing that a lot of people report experiencing after they leave the classroom. Another thing is professional growth opportunities. For most people, you're a teacher and you're a teacher your whole career. There's not really anything else that you do. You might change grade levels, you might change districts, you might change schools, but for the most part, that's kind of the only thing that you do. And I say only very lightly. You do a lot. I'm not trying to downplay what you do, but as far as having some variety, there's not a whole lot there other than curriculum changes for the most part. Whereas if you go into the corporate environment, you typically have a lot more growth opportunities between individual contributors and managers and directors. If you want to climb the ladder all the way to the top to a chief level, there's a lot more that goes on, and there's a lot more variation between the different levels than in the teaching environment where it's basically your teacher or your administrator for the most part. There's a lot of variety that happens with those sorts of changes that my time as an instructional designer looked very different than my time as an instructional design lead, which looks very different than my time as an instructional design manager, which now looks very different as the CEO of an instructional design firm. So there's just a lot more that can kind of happen. I have found that it keeps me very interested in my job because there is so much that can change without a whole lot needing on my part, and it really keeps things more interesting so that you don't get burnt out and tired and bored of one career. You also have, in most cases, again, not in a toxic environment, which I've been in, but in a good, healthy corporate environment, which none of them are perfect, but there are definitely some that are worse than others. Respect for your expertise. When I went to that platelet collection company, I was respected because I was the expert in instructional design, and there was a lot more that I just felt really like, okay, people see what I do, they see the worth in what I do, and they respect me for what I do. And I didn't have to deal with parent drama or colleague drama anymore. There's a lot less of that in the corporate world. Not to say that you're going to like everyone you worked with. There's definitely been people that I have not enjoyed working with, but it's a lot different when you're in that corporate environment when you're in a school environment. A lot more flexibility in your work environment, especially now in a post-COVID world. There's a lot more remote opportunities. So if you really want to work remotely and work from home, that's definitely something that is an option. If you're like, nope, I want to go into an office still, that's definitely still an option now in the post-COVID world. And so there's a lot of flexibility in where you work, and there's also a lot of flexibility in your time management of work. A lot of companies nowadays are super flexible with scheduling, and especially in roles like instructional design where you don't necessarily have to be like on calls all the time. There's a lot more flexibility in when you're able to work. So you can take a doctor's appointment without using PTO. You can go to your kid's dance recital in the middle of the day. You can go to that school assembly and watch your kid get an award and not have to take time, because a lot of times it's just shifting things around or making up time, or if you are lucky enough to get a manager like I had, and I was, you don't need to make up any time. Go see your kid's music program. It's not a big deal. So there's a lot more flexibility in that. You also get to use your skills in new ways. So you've been a teacher for however long you have been, and you've accumulated a wealth of skills, but you're really only using it in that one setting in those one ways. Whereas if you move to instructional design specifically, you are able to use a lot of your teaching skills in new ways, which makes them fun and exciting and interesting again. So those are some common pros for leaving the classroom. Let's talk about some of the cons for leaving the classroom. Things that I definitely struggled with at the beginning, and I've heard other people have struggled with, is losing that direct student impact. So specifically as an instructional designer, while we always have the student, or more commonly called learner, in mind, you aren't usually facilitating training. You're not delivering it. You're not hands-on with it. It's e-learning, or you're creating training for someone else to deliver. So you do lose some of that direct student impact. If that's really important to you, it might not be worth it to leave. I did miss some of that at first. I still think about a lot of my students fondly and, kind of think, oh, how is this person doing? I wonder what they're up to. Oh my gosh, they would have graduated high school by now. That's wild. And, definitely still think about those students. So you're going to lose that direct impact, that direct exposure, those direct experiences with those students when you leave the classroom. Giving up summers off, which is, I think I'm going to do a whole episode devoted just to that. And as you heard me say earlier in this episode, is it really off though? And I will tell you from personal experience, going from the classroom on a Friday to a corporate environment the next Monday, I really thought I was going to miss having a summer break, and I didn't. I was really surprised to find that first summer that I worked and went straight into work in a corporate environment. I do wish that I kind of had taken a couple weeks off maybe, but I didn't miss having the summer off. It really was a nice, easy transition, and all of the other benefits that I got, and not just HR benefits and pay, but, the flexibility of work environment. I remember I had, even before COVID, my kiddo got sick and they were like, yeah, work from home today. That's not a big deal. And there's a lot more flexibility that it made it not so painful to not have that summer off. I actually really didn't mind it at all. You can have uncertainty about a new career path when you leave the classroom because, again, your career path has been very linear. This is what you are, and this is what you are all the way across. Versus in a corporate environment, typically, there's steps and there's a ladder you can climb, as you've heard said, things like that. So it can come with some excitement for that. I feel like that's a little bit of a pro in the professional growth opportunities, but also can be a little bit of con because it's not always very clear what that might look like. And, instructional designers are also really good project managers. So it's not always just climbing a ladder and becoming a manager and then a director and then a VP and then a chief. It's not always a vertical climb. It can be linear in the fact that you're moving from one role to the next because of the skills that you're going to develop as an instructional designer. A lot of times it can feel like you're starting over professionally, and that can be really difficult. But especially if you choose something like instructional design, you get to leverage a lot of your skills. And so it doesn't really feel, at least from my experience, it didn't really feel like I was starting over. It mostly just felt like I was using those skills in different manners that made them really interesting again, and then also getting to learn some new skills and the software and things like that. You could, especially if you're further along in your teaching career and going to an entry-level instructional design position, you could experience a potential salary dip initially. However, I will say the raises that are available in the corporate environment are much bigger and much more often than in teaching. A lot of times you'll hear about pay band freezes and things like that, where you get stuck for years and years and years. That's not something that I have ever experienced and have heard a ton about in the corporate environment. So there were a couple times where, not when I left the classroom, but when I moved from one company to another, I did experience a little bit of a pay dip. But within a year, I was over what I had ended at the previous company with. And so you could potentially have a little bit of a salary dip, again, if you're further along in your teaching career. But usually it doesn't last very long, and the potential and the benefits are going to outweigh that dip. You could also, and I do experience this still, and I've been out of the classroom since 2019, and I do still experience this con of missing the classroom community. So, with your students, you create like a little family every year, and with your teammates, you also create that community. And I do miss working in those environments sometimes. Usually in a corporate environment, you're still going to have a team, but it's just a little bit different. Like, when you're teaching, you guys are in the trenches together, like giving each other bathroom breaks when you've accidentally had too much water. Things like that are just a bit different in the corporate environment that I do still miss to this day. And so that's something to think about as well. One thing that I struggled with, that I've heard a lot of people have struggled with as well, is guilt about leaving and abandoning your students and colleagues. And that is actually one of the reasons why I think I stayed in teaching a little bit longer than I really should have, was because I did feel I'm a teacher. What else am I supposed to do? But then it also felt like I'm letting this system down, which we'll talk about that mindset issue. But it can feel sometimes a little bit like guilt, like you're leaving other people behind. And, there is a lot of trauma that teachers experience, and a lot of it is shared trauma, especially with your colleagues. So as much as it's difficult to get over that sometimes, it is definitely a con that you might experience, is having that guilt and feeling it's kind of almost like survivor's guilt when you get out. And you feel like, oh my gosh, this is so much better. I wish everyone knew and would do this. It almost feels like, oh, I feel so bad for the people that are still there, which is partly why I have created the ID Den. Because I still know plenty of teachers. My sister is one of them that is happy to be in the classroom. It feels like her life calling. She feels like she's in the right place. Like, I'm all for that. But I also know that there's a lot of people that feel burnt out, that feel tired, that feel like the classroom is no longer the place for them and they need a change. And that's why I created the ID Den, is to help support those teachers. So sometimes, especially if you know colleagues that are struggling, you can have that feeling of guilt that you got out, you're experiencing a better life for yourself, and they're still stuck there. So let's get to some questions that you should be asking yourself as you are considering leaving the classroom. And the first question that I want to start with is, when did the feeling start? So there's a couple things to consider. Did the feeling start a long time ago, or is it more recent? Did it come on gradually, or was it sudden? Do you feel like it was tied to a specific event or events? Or do you think that it's just general burnout that you have accumulated over time? Does it get stronger, or does it come and go? So for me, the feeling was kind of a mix of sudden and tied to specific events. And if you've listened to the second episode where I talk about my story, you'll know that it was kind of a combination of a rough school environment, specifically a desk throwing student while I was pregnant, and then a bad, unfair performance review that kind of was a kind of sudden specific event. But then from there, for me, it got stronger. It didn't come and go. And I have a teacher friend that I feel like it comes and goes. Like sometimes she's like, nope, I'm good. My class is great. This is wonderful. And then a few months later, she'll be like, oh my gosh, the student's showing me their true colors now and I want out. And then a few months later, she'll be like, okay, that situation is under control. I feel fine again. Like she definitely has waves. So I'm not confident that leaving the classroom is really what she wants to do. Whereas for me, it happened and then it just kept getting worse. The burnout got worse. So it was kind of a specific event initially, but then I continued teaching and the burnout got worse and I just felt more and more like I don't want to be here anymore, and it just got stronger. So for me, the feeling started about 3 years before I actually left, but it had that event that kind of triggered it mostly, and then it only got stronger from there, which let me know that like, okay, I'm ready to leave the classroom. Like I need to go. The second question that I want you to think about is, would moving help? If you were in a different grade level, do you think that would address your issues? Do you have issues with the age of your students, with the curriculum, with what you have to teach, with how much testing your grade level has? I know here, third grade has so much testing. Fourth grade doesn't have so much. So would maybe moving a grade level address the issues that you're struggling with? Would a new school district or just a different school within your district change things for you? Do you hate your team? Do you dislike your principal? Is it something that's more tied to the building, or you don't like the way that the district handles parent complaints and this other one handles it better? Think about, is it the environment that you're in, or is it the profession? A couple things to think about specific to this question of moving. Some red flags that moving won't fix are if you have problems with the systemic issues in education. If you have problems with the profession overall and the public education system, or even if you're in charter or private, if you have issues with the system, moving's not going to fix those. Those issues are everywhere. And moving grade levels, moving schools, moving districts is not going to help fix that for you. If you have issues with the workload, moving is not going to fix that. The workload is hard everywhere, at every grade level, every school, every district. The workload isn't going to change. It's going to follow you wherever you go. So moving isn't going to help with that. If you have an issue with your personal values conflicting with your professional values, moving is not going to fix that either. It's not going to do anything. And then kind of finally, if you feel like your skill sets have outgrown the role, moving's not going to change that. If you're bored, if you're like, man, I don't enjoy this work anymore, I feel like I can do so much more, moving is not going to help solve that issue. Situations where moving might be worth trying, and again, most of the time, in my experience and in some of the other teachers that I've known that left the classroom, moving just reinforces it in most cases, but moving might be worth giving it a try if you're in a toxic school culture specifically. I moved school districts and went back to the other district and moved grades all in one swoop. In the end, it didn't help, but I was in a toxic school culture. And so the culture improved, but that highlighted all of those other things that moving doesn't fix for me. It might be worth moving if you feel like you have an unsupportive administration, which I also did. I felt like my administration did not support me and was not operating in a fair manner. I moved to one that I knew from experience would be better. And again, that fixed that issue, but it highlighted all the other ones that reinforced my decision to leave after I moved. If you feel like you are in the wrong grade level, the grade level's not a fit for you. And I see this a lot with kindergarten teachers. Kindergarten teachers are saints. I feel like they deal with so much because it's not just curriculum and education and all of that, they're helping these tiny humans learn school, like what school is, what friends are. There's so much that goes into that. Kindergarten teachers, all teachers are amazing and phenomenal, but my goodness, kindergarten teachers, from my perspective, in my experience, and as a mother of now 2 of my kids have gone through kindergarten, y'all are saints. And if you are not made to be a kindergarten teacher, you are going to hate life. I student taught in kindergarten, and that was almost enough to make me think before I even graduated and got my credential, maybe this isn't the right career for me. But at that point, it was like, well, I'm just never going to apply for kindergarten roles. That's just not the right grade level fit for me. So it can work the other way around, though. If you're working with older kiddos and you really want to be working with those younger kiddos and you really want to do those things and you have that patience level, then that could work the other way around. But if you think that you're just in the wrong grade level, it's not the right age for you, it's not the right kind of curriculum that you want to teach, some people need to be in high school to feel satisfied, then that is a time where moving might help that situation. If you have geographic limitations, if you're feeling frustrated because it takes you 45 minutes to get to work, maybe you need to try and see if you can find an opening at a closer school, if that's really what your frustration is. Again, a lot of times moving isn't going to help. A lot of times it's just going to highlight that you're done. But there are some instances, especially in those areas of toxic culture and wrong grade levels and geographic limitations, where moving might help alleviate the frustrations you're feeling. You just need to take time to sit with the frustrations and think through them and think, is it going to get better if I move? If you love teaching and you just hate that you have a long commute, it might work for you to move, and you don't have to go and transition into a new career. You just need to find a school closer to your house. But if you sit there and think, no, I have a problem with how the public school system is operating and how teachers are treated and a lot of the things that I had problems with, moving's not going to do anything. It's just going to reinforce those for you. So let's talk about the honest middle ground. You can love teaching and still want out. I loved, when I boiled it down to just teaching students, I loved my job and I was good at it. It was all the other things that became an issue for me and made me feel like I need to leave the classroom. So I want you to feel like if you love teaching, but you're frustrated and you feel like you want to change, that is a completely valid point. And that's where the power of and comes in. I have heard that so many times from so many different people, is the power of and instead of but. It's not, I love teaching, but I want to leave the classroom. No, it's, I love teaching and I want to leave the classroom. Both can exist at the same time. And I teach this to my children all the time. You can feel excited and you can feel scared all at the same time. You can love teaching and you can still want to leave all at the same time. And those feelings are valid and they can exist together. Wanting better for yourself isn't selfish. I feel like I need to repeat that because I know I struggled with that so much. And even when I go back, there are certain teachers that, like, if I go back to my old school to visit, they always give off the air like I was being selfish to leave. Like, they're better than I am because they're staying, even if they hate it, which I disagree with. You're not the best teacher that you can be for your students if you hate your job. That's just not how it works. So I'm going to say it again. Wanting better for yourself is not selfish. You are not being selfish. If you want better pay to provide for your family, if you want better time, flexibility to be present for your children, if you want less workload so that you have the energy to be present in your life outside of your job, that is not selfish. And it is okay to want those things. Teaching will always be part of who you are. I had friends over this weekend and I was talking about teaching in the public school system, and there was a sentence that I said something like, well, how we teach math. I laughed and I said out loud, I say we like I'm still a teacher. Teaching is always going to be part of who you are. It is such a big part of your life, part of your career experience, and part of your history. Transitioning doesn't erase that, and it also doesn't erase your impact. Your impact is going to look differently outside of the classroom, but it doesn't mean that it's less. And I don't want you or anyone else to make you feel any other way. Something I'm very passionate about, and hopefully that's coming across whether you're listening or whether you're watching on YouTube. But this is such a big thing for me because I have experienced both the guilt of leaving and wanting to leave and feeling like, oh gosh, like my morals must not be as great because I'm not going to sacrifice my well-being and my relationship with my family for this job. Sometimes teaching can seem very like martyrish, and it doesn't have to be that way. You can still have been a good teacher and made the decision to leave the classroom. It doesn't make you any less, and it makes me very angry still to this day when I go and people are like, oh, are you enjoying all your money? Like I am greedy or selfish because I wanted to provide for my family differently than I was able to on a teacher's salary. It doesn't have to be that way, and I don't want you to feel that way if you're trying to decide whether or not to leave. A couple other things as you are trying to make the decision is timeline considerations. I got the job that I left the classroom for in March. Thankfully, they were good with me finishing out my contract, and I didn't start until June. If you're applying for jobs in December, I can't guarantee that they'll wait even a month, 2 weeks, let alone potentially 6 for you to stop teaching. So one thing that you're going to need to consider is your timeline for leaving, because either you have to be okay with breaking your contract and whatever repercussions happen in your district, in your state, in your situation, if you do that, versus waiting to try and get something over the summer. I will also say right now, the job market is tricky. So you can't be applying for jobs in June thinking you're going to get a job in June. That's just not how it's working. So you're going to have to kind of think about where you're at, think about what point in the year it is, and kind of start thinking about when you need to start applying for jobs if you really feel like, yes, I need to leave the classroom. And you also have to think through, would I be okay breaking my contract if an opportunity came around that I would have to break my contract in order to do, which also leads to financial planning needs. So if you're going to take a break in between and like take a month off, which I kind of wish I had done that, then you think through your financial impact as well of some of these decisions. There can be financial repercussions for breaking a contract. You need to look into and talk about that as well as you need. Obviously, I'm not saying go run to HR and be like, I'm going to quit teaching. What's going to happen to me? But do your research and do look into things, reread your contract, do the investigation to see if there's any financial impact. I know for me, if I had broken my contract, I would have had to pay back some of my like health care. I would have had to make payments because I broke the contract. That was one of the things that was going to happen, which is why I really didn't want to. However, the opportunity that had come along when I got the job in March, if they had said, nope, we need you to start April at the latest, I would have broken my contract and I would have paid that back because what I was gaining would have been enough. So those are some things that you need to think through as well. A support system evaluation. Do you have people in your life who are going to support your decision and help support you in making the transition? That is another thing to consider. I had a very wonderful, especially with my husband, support system in place for making the transition. Even if I were to break my contract, my husband and I sat down and talked about it, and we weighed the pros and cons, and he was like, yep, I totally support that if that's what you feel like you need to do and they're not willing to wait for you. Thankfully, they were willing to wait for me, so I didn't run into that issue. But you also need to look at, do you have the support system in place to help you through this? One of my goals with the ID Den is to help provide support the best way that I can. I'm not your best friend. I'm not your mom. I'm not your sister. But I am someone who can be there to help support you if you don't have that. And even if you do have that and you just want the support, the additional support, like that's what I'm happy to be here for. That's part of the community that I want to create with the ID Den, is to have that support in place for you, especially if you don't have support in that. Another thing to consider are trial periods or gradual transitions. Is there a situation in which maybe you can start working a little bit part-time in something while you finish out the school year? That was another thing that I had thought about was, well, maybe I can just work a few hours a week while I finish out the school year for this job to help get them what they needed, but also not break my contract. There are some companies that have like a 90-day probation period where you don't get any sort of, PTO, things like that until that time frame is done. So think about that. If you have a bunch of plans in the next 3 months and you're going to start a new job that has a probation period, you're going to have to think through those things. I, more than anything, want to make sure that you know that you have the permission to want more. Your feelings are valid. Outgrowing a role is totally normal. So many people do it. My husband completely career transitioned. He wasn't a teacher, but he was in HR software, and now he's a writer. And, he is 40 and made that decision just a couple of years ago. So outgrowing a role is normal, and you're never too old. It's never too late if that's what you feel is best for you and your family and your situation. You are not betraying anyone by evolving. And another quote that I heard many years ago, I don't know who from, that I tell my kids all the time, it's okay to change your mind. You should never feel stuck in something. If you feel like you need to change your mind, if nobody else is giving you the permission to, I'm giving you the permission to change your mind, to want more or better or just different for yourself. You are not being selfish, and if anyone is making you feel that way, their opinion doesn't matter. You need to do ultimately what is right for you, and that's what matters. You need to worry about you because nobody else is going to worry about you. You get to make that decision for yourself. So hopefully those questions help. Hopefully hearing some of those pros and cons help. Hopefully hearing some of my experiences helped. Make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with your teacher friends who might be considering a change. And please connect with me on Instagram at @TheIDDen. I am so happy to help support you in any way that I can there. Only you can decide what is right for your life, and there's no shame in either choice. Whether you decide to stay or whether you decide to go, that is ultimately your decision. Nobody else can make for you. And at the end of the day, you are who matters the most in your own life.